pleased to speak with you today about federal marijuana policies impacting the District of Columbia. While the American people support marijuana legislation, and we continue to make progress on marijuana legislation in the states, Congress continues to block progress on marijuana legislation in the District of Columbia and nationally. It is past time for Congress to catch up with the American people and the states on marijuana. In addition to working to remove the rider that prohibits DC from spending its local funds to commercialize adult use marijuana, I have been working to allow marijuana in public and other federally assisted housing. For several Congresses, I have introduced a bill that will allow marijuana in public and other federally assisted housing in compliance with marijuana laws, where the property is located, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development rules on smoking cigarettes. I also previously wrote then HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge, urging her to use her executive discretion not to enforce rules against marijuana in federally assisted housing in compliance with the marijuana laws of the state where the property is located. HUD rejected my request, saying it did not have this authority. I disagree with HUD's interpretation of the law. Until the District of Columbia has statehood, Congress will control DC's local affairs. Since 2014, Congress has used its undemocratic power over DC to block DC from spending its local funds to commercialize adult use marijuana. DC has legalized the possession of adult use marijuana, but Congress has blocked DC from legalizing, taxing, and regulating adult use sales. Congress recently finally finished the fiscal year 2024 appropriation bill. The original Senate bill would have allowed DC to commercialize adult use marijuana. However, President Biden and House Republicans opposed allowing DC to do so, and they prevailed in the final bill. I am deeply disappointed that President Biden, who strongly supports DC's statehood, which would allow DC to enact its own policies without congressional interference, supports blocking DC from commercializing adult use marijuana. The President's recently released fiscal year 2025 budget would also prohibit DC from spending its local funds to commercialize adult use marijuana. I'm hopeful that Congress will remove the rider that prohibits DC from commercializing adult use marijuana even before DC achieves statehood. But DC is also closer to statehood than ever before. The 690,000 residents of the District of Columbia, the majority of whom are Black and brown, have all the obligations of citizenship, including paying federal taxes, but are denied voting representation in Congress, and Congress has full control over DC's local affairs. DC's statehood is my top priority in Congress. In the last two Congresses, we made historic progress on DC's statehood. In 2020, the House passed my DC statehood bill, which was the first time in history either chamber of Congress had passed the DC statehood bill. The House passed it again in 2021. When I introduced the bill on the first day bills could be introduced this Congress, I did so with 165 original co-sponsors, which was the most original co-sponsors of any bill introduced that day. Since then, I have added more co-sponsors every day. I have 206 co-sponsors. The Senate version of the bill, sponsored by Senator Tom Carper, was introduced this Congress with a record number of original co-sponsors, 43. It now has 46 co-sponsors. Instead of abusing its power over the District of Columbia by nullifying legislation enacted by the D.C. Council and prohibiting D.C. from commercializing adult-use marijuana, Congress should adhere to democratic principles and pass my D.C. statehood bill. I would like to note a bill I have long introduced to give D.C. authority to grant clemency for D.C. crimes, including relating to marijuana, in the same manner states grant clemency for state crimes. Currently, only the president has the authority to grant clemency for D.C. crimes. If we continue to fight, I believe full marijuana legalization in D.C. and at the federal level will in fact happen. Thank you for having me today.